Hi, I'm Joel Richardson, and this is The Underground. On today's program, I want to take some time to look at the critical chapter of Daniel 2. Now, this is a prophecy, really a looming Old Testament prophecy, which is a dream that was given to King Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of ancient Mesopotamia, as it was revealed to Daniel the prophet. Now, this is a prophecy that I believe has been widely misinterpreted, really down through history, by the majority of the commentators on the book of Daniel. This is a chapter that most commentators have looked to conclude that the Antichrist's empire would, in essence, be a revived Roman Empire. Now, when we actually take the time to look at the prophecy, to look at the passage, to look at the grammar and the wording of the prophecy, as well as history, I think that we'll see that both exegetically and historically, this Roman interpretation of Daniel 2 simply does not hold up. So let's begin by examining this critical prophecy. Now, in essence, we're going to pick up in verse 31. Now, what had happened up until this point was that King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And it was a dream of this great metallic statue. And it obviously had impacted him in a fairly profound way. And so he was determined to figure out what it meant. And so he had been calling all of his magicians and his, sorcerers and everyone in his court trying to help him with the interpretation of the dream, and no one could. Until someone suggested that there is this young man named Daniel among the Hebrew exiles, and he is gifted in the interpretation of dreams and this sort of thing. So they called Daniel forward. Daniel says, "Give me a night to sleep on it." Basically, he says, "Let me, have a night. We'll see what the Lord reveals, and then let me get back to you." And so King Nebuchadnezzar says, "That's great." So Daniel does that. He sleeps. The Lord reveals not only the dream, but the interpretation of the dream to Daniel. And so Daniel comes back to King Nebuchadnezzar, and this is where we pick up. So beginning in verse 31, Daniel is explaining the interpretation to Nebuchadnezzar, and he says this. He says, "You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome." So this magnificent statue. Now, Daniel has Nebuchadnezzar's attention at this point, because no one up until that point could explain to Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was. But the God of heaven, the creator of heaven and earth, had revealed it to Daniel. And so he has the king's attention. Now we turn to verses 32 through 34. And then Daniel says this, "Now the head of the statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver." So its breast, its chest, and its arms of silver. And then its belly and its thighs are made of bronze. Its legs are made of iron. And then its feet, partly iron, partly clay. And then Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "You continued looking until a stone was cut out, not with human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, and it crushed them." So this great metallic statue made up of four, arguably five different components or segments, and then this rock that's cut out, not with human hands, but through divine means, strikes the statue specifically on the feet, and then the entire statue is completely crushed. Then in verse 35, Daniel says this, "Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all crushed at the same time." This is critical, and we're going to come back to this. and they became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, so there was not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain, and it filled the whole earth. So when this rock strikes the statue, specifically on its feet, the entire statue at the same time is completely wiped out. All residue and remnants of all of these previous empires diminishes immediately and suddenly, while that rock fills the whole earth and becomes a great mountain, or this is common biblical symbolism for a great kingdom. So the rock becomes a great kingdom that fills the whole earth. So now the traditional view of the four kingdoms that are represented by the statues, the traditional view, of course, Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "You are the head of gold." So clearly the Babylonian Empire is represented by the head of gold. And then virtually all will say that the Medo-Persian Empire is represented in the chest and the arms. And then as you get down to the belly and the thighs of bronze, people will say this is the Grecian Empire, the Alexandrian Greek Empire. And then when you get to the legs of iron, virtually all commentators say this represents the Roman Empire. So the legs of iron represent the Roman Empire. Now, this is based on largely the assumption that from a Western perspective, these were the procession of kingdoms. So we'll just say, well, the Roman Empire came after the Greek Empire. But that's really not necessarily true. Again, that's only true if we are looking at it strictly from the Western lens of history. You know, if you're in Persia, then it wasn't really the Roman Empire that succeeded the Grecian Empire. Rather, it was the Parthian Empire, which in many ways was simply an extension of the previous Persian Empire. And so we need to always be very careful of reading the scriptures from a purely Western lens of history. Because remember, this is a dream that was given to Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king of ancient Mesopotamia, of ancient Babylon. And so really the context of the dream has to make sense to King Nebuchadnezzar. He's the one that the dream was given to, and really not only was the dream given to him, but the interpretation to him as well. So again, it is essential that we take note of the context and the very specific subject matter of the dream. So in verses 37 through 40, we're given that context. Daniel says, "You, O king, are the King of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. But after you shall arise another kingdom." So the context is specifically, again, the passage defines the context. The context is a series of kingdoms that would succeed Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian kingdom. So he says, after you shall arise another kingdom, and then another, a third kingdom, and a fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. And then he says, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. So the dream is about a series of kingdoms that would conquer and would succeed the Babylonian kingdom. And this is really critical. It's a series of empires that would succeed Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Now, in highlighting verse 40, we need to really sort of park there for a second and take a look at this. We need to take note of the fact that the passage refers to the fourth kingdom as the fourth kingdom. Nowhere in the passage does it refer to the fourth kingdom as the Roman Empire. Now, many Bibles will actually say in the subheading, the Roman Empire, but it's not actually in the text. That's just added by the manufacturers of the Bibles. But when we look at verse 40, and I want to look at this from a handful of different translations, this is a critical bit of information that's given to us. It says, the fourth kingdom will break in pieces and crush all of the others. That's the New King James Version. The Net translation says, the fourth kingdom will break in pieces and crush the others. So again, what are the others? The others are Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. The fourth kingdom, whichever kingdom it is, it must fulfill the criteria of the prophecy, which is to say it would crush and conquer Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. This is critical. Now, when we actually simply look at maps, we look at maps of the ancient empires, we begin with Babylon. We see that the Babylonian Empire was a significant ancient empire. It ruled much of Mesopotamia, the Middle East. It actually extended all the way down into North Africa, eventually controlling parts of Egypt. And then after that, you have the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, a massive empire that spanned all the way from Europe in the west, all the way across to India, down again into North Africa and Egypt, a massive empire. Clearly, the Medo-Persian Empire succeeded and conquered the Babylonian Empire. Then you had Alexander's Alexandrian Greek Empire. This is an empire, again, very similar to the Medo-Persian Empire that swept from Europe all the way across the Middle East. It reached India. It clearly conquered Babylon. It clearly conquered the Babylonian Empire. Then you get to the Roman Empire, and the problem with the Roman Empire is that suddenly, unlike the Medo-Persian Empire, unlike the Greek Empire, everything shifts to the west. Everything suddenly shifts toward Europe. And it was not exclusively Europe, to be clear. The Roman Empire did extend into the large sections of the Middle East and North Africa, but by and large, the Roman Empire, unlike the previous empires, much more so was a Western-oriented empire. Now, the question is, does the Roman Empire historically meet the criteria of the passage? Did it crush all the others? And the answer is not really, most certainly not, with regard to the Persian Empire. Now, with regard to the Babylonian Empire, well, in AD 116, Emperor Trajan did cross the Euphrates and the Tigris, and he conquered what was then really the broken down ruins of Babylon. But really, in just a series of months, historians say that Trajan had a stroke. He withdrew, and then Hadrian, who was his successor from that point forward, really made the easternmost extent of the Roman Empire the Euphrates River. It never went past that. And so to say, did the Roman Empire crush Babylon in the way that the passage describes? And it's like, no, they kind of really didn't. From Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, the Roman Empire would have been more of a peripheral issue. When we look at the roughly 1,500-year period that the Roman Empire existed, to say that for less than a year it sort of extended its range into the heartland of Babylon, but then quickly withdrew, that's difficult to say that it crushed and conquered the Babylonian Empire. But even more so, when we ask the question, did the Roman Empire crush the Persian Empire? And really, it takes an extreme stretching and twisting of history to say that that is the case. The Roman Empire, overwhelmingly, you could say that it conquered maybe a third of the region, of the geography that the Persian Empire controlled, but it left at least 2/3 of the Medo-Persian Empire completely untouched. And so it would be very difficult to say that the Roman Empire crushed the Medo-Persian Empire. Yet the scriptures say that the fourth kingdom would crush completely, in a very significant way, all of the others. Not 2 out of 3 of the others, all of the others. And we need to submit ourselves to what the text says and not try to force the text into conforming to our particular positions. On the other hand, when we look at the historical Islamic empire, and this is a term that I'm using to refer to the series of caliphates, the series of successor kingdoms after Muhammad died, that together make up what I'm calling the Islamic empire. So you had the Rashidun Caliphate, you had the Umayyad, the Abbasid, eventually you had the Ottoman Empire. And together, these really made up the various dynasties, if you will, that together make up the Islamic Empire. When we look at this empire, this is really the only other candidate in history that we have to look to other than the Roman Empire. And then we ask the question, did the Islamic Empire crush all the others? And the answer is absolutely, completely yes. Geographically, there is no question that the Islamic Empire crushed Babylon. Think modern-day Iraq. Crushed Medo-Persia. think modern-day Iran, as well as the Alexandrian Greek kingdom, think modern-day Turkey, and really much of the Middle East. And for a large period of time, the Ottomans actually extended their control well up into Europe and what's in modern times referred to as the Balkans, that whole region was under the control of Islam for really hundreds and hundreds of years. And even today, among the Macedonians and the Albanians in that region, Islam still is a majority throughout that part of the world.
For this week's program, we are offering What Comes Next in the Middle East Bundle. This important resource bundle includes the following powerful 6 resources. Joel's newest teaching DVD, What Comes Next in the Middle East. This 3-session teaching DVD examines the 2 critical passages of Daniel chapter 8 and Isaiah 19, understanding what is happening right now in the Middle East and what may be next on the prophetic horizon. Second, you will receive the documentary film Better Friends Than Mountains, a film about ISIS, the Kurdish people, and the gospel of Jesus Christ. This beautifully made film will inspire and move you to learn what the Lord is doing right now in one of the world's most active crisis zones. Finally, you will receive 4 copies of Dear Muslim Friend. This highly recommended book answers all of the primary objections to biblical faith commonly brought up by Muslims. Not only is this a critical book for all Christians, but it was specifically created to give away to Muslims. Together, these items are valued at over $60. But when you purchase all 6 items at the discounted rate of only $50, you help support this ministry. Go to joelstrumpet.com and order the What Comes Next in the Middle East bundle.
So now again, just for clarity, when we compare the difference between the Roman Empire and the Islamic Empire meets the criteria of the prophecy, whereas the Roman Empire only meets it with quite a bit of stretching. Now, this is the reference. What we've been discussing is the reference in verse 40 to the nature of the rise of the 4th kingdom. But if this is not enough to convince you, then the passage reiterates the fact that the 4th kingdom would be comprised of Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. That essentially this empire would be a composite of all 3, because it speaks not only of the rise of the 4th kingdom, it also speaks of the demise and the destruction of the 4th kingdom. So let's look at these 2 verses again. In verse 34 and 35, Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, he says, "While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands." Again, most commentators, and I agree, believe that this is referring to the Messianic kingdom. When Jesus returns, this is the kingdom that he will establish that will replace all other kingdoms. And so as this rock is cut out, not by human hands, it strikes the statue on its feet, specifically in the final period of this statue, the final manifestation of the Antichrist empire at the end of the age. The rock strikes the statue and it smashes them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, that's basically all of the previous empires, the silver and the gold, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, all of them were broken to pieces at the same time. And they became like chaff on the summer threshing floor. The wind blew them away, and they became no more. The point is this: when Jesus returns, when he comes to bring and establish his kingdom on the earth, he will crush the kingdom of the Antichrist. And when he does that, by virtue of the kingdom of the Antichrist being destroyed, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece will also be destroyed at that very same time. Now, it's not possible for those others to be destroyed unless they are part of the same entity. And so this is what Scripture does. When it's making an important point, it reiterates it several times because the Lord doesn't want us to be confused. He wants to make this very important point clear. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece together will comprise the final kingdom of the Antichrist. Now, to even further make this point very clear, when we skip forward to the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 13, verse 2, we read this. It says, "The beast which I saw," now it's speaking of the kingdom of the Antichrist, It's really the Antichrist is the beast, but yet the kingdom that he leads is also referred to as a beast based on Daniel chapter 7, which these kingdoms are all referred to as beasts. And it says, the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet was like that of a bear, and his mouth like that of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. What is the point here? Is that the final kingdom of the Antichrist will be a composite of the lion, the leopard, and the bear. Now, when we turn to Daniel chapter 7, we see that the lion, the leopard, and the bear is in fact the same kingdoms. They are the same kingdoms that were just referred to in Daniel 2. The lion is Babylon, the leopard is Greece, and the bear is Persia. So in the same way that Daniel 2 made it very clear that Babylon, Medo, Persia, and Greece would comprise the final kingdom of the Antichrist, so also Revelation 13 reveals to us that the fourth beast spoken of in Daniel 7 is in fact a composite of all three previous empires. The Lord has made this point abundantly clear, and we need to pay attention. Now, if we are to simply look at a map and really combine ancient Babylon, ancient Medo-Persia, and ancient Greece, and say, does that look like the Roman Empire? Well, the answer is no. It doesn't look like the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was largely a European empire that extended into the Middle East and North Africa, whereas a combined Babylonian, Medo-Persian, and Grecian empire is clearly a massive empire which expands over the entirety of the Middle East and extends into Europe. It is a Middle Eastern empire, not primarily a European empire. So we need to take note of this. Another very interesting point that is made in Daniel chapter 2, verse 41, Daniel says, "In that you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom." So we know that the kingdom of the Antichrist will be a kingdom that is defined by being divided. Now again, when we look at the Roman Empire, we cannot rightly say that it was a divided empire. Now some people will say, well, you had the Eastern Byzantine Empire and then the Western Roman Empire. Yeah, for a few hundred years, there was clearly sort of a division. But if you're looking at the entirety, the history of the Roman Empire, division is really not something that defined that empire. On the other hand, when we look at the Islamic world, we see that from the time that Muhammad died, immediately after he died, there was a clear division among his followers. On one side, you had those that believed his successorship should go to his family. They became known as the partisans or the party of Ali. They became known as the Shia. And they're really the minority sect of Muslims today, roughly 12 to 15%. And then the majority sect believed that the successorship should go to his friends or the Suhayba. And so they became known as the Sunnis. And again, they make up 85, 87% of the Islamic world. So from the very beginning, the Islamic world, again, meets the descriptions of the prophecy, whereas the Roman Empire simply doesn't. So you can really go down the line and you can see that Islam fulfills the criteria the Roman Empire doesn't. Another critical bit of information is given to us in Daniel 7 and verse 7. And this is where it really once again reiterates the fact that this fourth kingdom will be a crushing, devouring empire. Let's read verse 7 together. It says, "After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a fourth beast, terrifying, frightening, very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims, and it trampled underfoot whatever was left." Now, what's so interesting is that when you look at the Roman Empire, you can say, well, they had mighty military, and if there was a rebellion, they would crush it. But by and large, the Roman Empire really is known in history, among all other empires, as an empire that created infrastructure. They're known for creating roads. They're known for creating aqueducts. They're known for creating law and establishing order. The Roman Empire, in so many ways, was a nation-building empire of the ancient world. And their whole purpose, the Roman Empire really built a revenue gathering machine. This is the reason they built the roads, was so that they could bring back the tribute to Caesar, back to Rome, so they could build up Rome. When we look at the Islamic Empire, from the very beginning, it was a destructive, destroying empire. The Islamic Empire was not about establishing infrastructure. It was about constantly devouring new regions to really plunder and take the booty. They weren't about establishing a strong economy in different parts of the world so they could bring the taxes back. The Islamic Empire is about constantly expanding. And this is a profound difference between the Islamic Empire and the Roman Empire. And once again, the Islamic Empire meets the criteria of the prophecies concerning this fourth kingdom. The Roman Empire fails. The Islamic Empire meets it to a T. When we look at all that ISIS is doing across the region today, we see them ripping crosses off of churches. We see them destroying churches. We see them destroying shrines, erasing previous cultures. This is the pattern that was established by Muhammad's earliest followers during the early conquests, and today we see the same thing. Wherever Islam spreads in its more radical forms, it devours, it destroys, and it erases. This cannot be said of the Roman Empire. And so in conclusion, having looked at the fourth kingdom of Daniel chapter 2, I want to suggest to you that as we look at this statue, that when we come to the legs of iron, the Roman Empire does not fit the biblical descriptions, whereas the historical Islamic Empire fits the descriptions, and we are now in the process of seeing that historical Islamic Empire being revived. It doesn't mean that ISIS per se is that, but we see the Islamic world awakening. We see a call back to a caliphate. We see a call back to unity of the Islamic world. And I believe the days that we are in now, we are seeing the beginnings of the coming together of that final empire that will come to be ruled by the Antichrist. Well, that's all the time that we have for now. I want to thank you once again for being with us. I'm Joel Richardson, and this is The Underground.